What's up, everybody? Welcome in to a NBA Game Week edition of
Mm,
SSPN.
the most exciting edition of SSPN, Mr. McLaren.
That is a good way to put it. And we've got some more news. We've got some things to talk about kind of going into this episode. Me and Ethan were just thinking, okay, we'll do a little preseason preview, kind of go over the schedule, give our thoughts on everything. And, probably not too much to dive into. And lo and behold, we forget about one, Media Day, and of
Mm,
course, also two, what happened the day right after we recorded is the news that Devin Vassell will be entering the year with an injury.
right.
Um, but when I heard that, and I was reading the headlines, I didn't really have too much time to dive into it. When I first saw it, it seemed like he was going to be out a significant period of time. But I
hmm
ended up looking up an article today. He's actually only going to miss the first 5 games of the season. Well, they're going to reevaluate him after the first 5 games of the season.
Right.
So that's not, as long as maybe I kind of deduced from some of the alerts that I got on my phone. So that was good to hear. But with that being said, that is going to change up some things at the beginning of the season, even if it does only end up being 5 games that he's out. So I figured we could start this episode. We did our lineup predictions last week, you know, and that was, of course, without knowing this news. So, with that news in mind, I'll dish it to you, Ethan. What do you think the lineup will be on opening day with Devin Vassell not in the rotation?
I might shock some people with this pick, Jude, but I'm going
Okay.
to go with Malachi Branham for a few
Ooh.
reasons. The first one, he has experience in that starting lineup before. Uh, Last time Devin was hurt for a long period of time, he took up that mantle, and honestly, he performed better in that role than he did off the bench that season. I'm also a little more confident in his ability after watching his media day presser.
Hmm.
He seems very confident in himself. He seems like he's been working kind of independently. He's keeping his goals to his chest. And if you just look at his demeanor, his body language, and his tone of voice, um, he seems very sure of himself and
Hmm.
kind of like he found a different confidence this offseason in the work that he's put in. And he definitely made it known that defense was something that he was focusing on in his workouts, as well as getting stronger. And the third thing was just getting reps as far as shooting the ball and being a better catch and shoot off ball shooter and working on his stroke. So all those things combined, I think that he deserves the nod over a Julian Champagny because I think he's more a part of our future than Julian. So as long as he competes in training camp, I think he should get the nod over him. And I just don't want Stefan to start only because he's a rookie. I'm sure that he's been kind of told what his role is going to be. Even though he'll never say that publicly, I'm pretty sure he knows
Right.
what his role is going to be. There's just no reason to change that up on a 19-year-old. In my eyes, let's get him comfortable in the role that he's going to play for this season, especially if competing is what we're all about, which is according to their pressers, what everyone's goal is competing for a playoff spot.
Well, I just pulled this up and we've just got a picture of Shadur Sanders instead of the San Antonio Spurs provide injury
Mm,
update for Devin Vassell, which you can see is behind this. I don't think I have an ad blocker on, but I wanted to read this article. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing since we can't see it. But I'm going to pull up the article in a different tab and at least just kind of read some of the updates there. But to kind of go off of what you said, we'll definitely get into media day. I see Wemby's Castle is in the chat kind of talking about it. We're going to dive into that kind of overall a little bit more. I spent like a little over an hour watching all of the media day press conferences today from Pop to Harrison Barnes to Keldon. Everybody that they had. I know they've been releasing some training camp interviews as well, but I mainly just watched those pressers. I have seen some clips from some of the other ones, but getting back to the lineup prediction, so I went a different way, Ethan,
okay.
and I'm sure you can imagine of what I'm going to go with. I just went with CP3, Champagny,
Mm,
Barnes, Sohan, and Wemby. I do agree with you in the sense that, like, if Malachi can reach his full potential, like if he's really competing in training camp, um, then, ideally he would be who you'd plug in there. I just have seen more reliability from Julian thus far in his career. For just someone that you want to plug and play, be a floor spacer, and not really get in anybody's way. If it works out the way that you just, think it will, I hope it goes that way, because that would
Mhm.
tell me that Malachi's making some progress as a first round pick. But based off of what I've seen so far, I'm just rolling the Champagny. And then again, same reasons you said with Stephon. I think one, the shooting. If you had
True.
Stephon out there, that could hurt the spacing a little bit. But also, I think just because he's a rookie, and because throughout most of this year, we're going to see him with that bench unit. I think establishing that chemistry and connection where, Julian is very much a plug and play type of guy. You know,
Mhm.
and obviously, when Devin comes back, that'll be a whole different dynamic in the starting lineup. But in the sense that he can be a catch and shoot guy, that is similar to Devin, to an extent,
Right.
when it comes to that starting lineup. So yeah, I don't really have too many, deep thoughts on that. But I do think that regardless of whether it's Champagny or Malachi that ends up starting, and I think that'll really just depend on how training camp plays out. I do think they'll keep Stephon off the bench to build
Mhm.
that bench chemistry and also just kind of ease him into things as a player.
I completely agree with everything that you said about Julian, and I won't be upset either way. Only other thing I'll say in Malachi's defense, I think that they have to change offensive scheme way less if Malachi is starting, because he does play similar style to Devin. And there might be some plays where Devin is a primary ball handler.
Right.
Malachi has that in his bag. You're not asking Julian
Right.
to take a pick and roll with Wemby. That's just, he's going to be in your
Hmm.
corner. So, in
Right.
that sense, yes, he's not in anyone's way, but it might cause change for the rest of the team.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying there, because when it comes to for all of the things that we want to criticize Malachi Branham on, if we're just comparing Julian Champagny and Malachi Branham's ball handling, I
Yeah,
think it's pretty easy to kind of pick there. So I definitely see your perspective there, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm not like, oh my gosh, it's for sure going to be Champagny.
right, right.
That's just if I had to pick, that's what I'd roll with. But
I'm
at
with
the
you.
end of the day, kind of like Pop said in his presser, all this stuff just depends on training camp. And that's kind of what we've been harping on over the past couple weeks.
Mm, word up.
So pretty much that's me and Ethan's predictions there with Devin Vassell's injury. And just to get back to that article that I was talking about. So again, he'll be reevaluated after the first 5 games of the season. Um, Last Friday, the San Antonio Spurs announced that Devin Vassell will miss at least 5 games of the 2024-25 NBA season as he recovers from surgery on his right foot. He'll be reevaluated on November 1st. Vassell missed the last 8 games of last season, which was originally written off as resting and preserving him after the season was effectively over, but it has since been determined that his injury was a bit more severe than the Spurs let on. That's just what this article's saying. But yeah, with all of that being said, again, it just stems back to that surgery on his right foot. And I think he had to have another surgery as well. He mentioned that in his press conference. Maybe there was just one in general, but I know he mentioned that he had a procedure in July because at the end of the year, it just didn't heal the way that it was supposed to.
Mm.
Um, but now that I think about it, was it 2022 when we shut him down and he had another surgery? Because I know he's had like kind of a lot of these little tic tac things that haven't been super serious. But
I can't remember.
okay, well that makes me feel better that it's not just me
I can't remember. I feel
who's
like he's been
forgetting.
shut down more than
But
once.
you know what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
Like I think that actually that one was on his knee.
Mhm.
And it was kind of a similar thing where it was, it's nothing serious, but it's just like we're getting these done in these years, before Wemby enters his prime, we really start competing.
Right.
But with that being said, the last thing I'll say on Devin's injury, or actually this will kind of lead into media day. I know you touched on some of the stuff that he said earlier, so I'll just kind of read off what I had written for Devin, and then we can jump into some of the other guys. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
All right. So the main things I wrote down for Devin is injury not serious is the first thing I wrote down. Not just because of the 5 games, but he even mentioned in the press conference, like he's basically he's on the court in his own words throughout training camp. And he said everything's been feeling good, kind of describing it as like a full go. So it seems like he's going through training camp with like no restrictions. This is just, kind of like with Charles Bassey, like Charles Bassey's going to go through training camp, but we're not going to play him throughout the preseason, just because, to be as safe as possible,
Mhm.
with the injury recovery. The other thing that I wrote down, though, getting into just some of the other stuff with Devin, is he said he's excited to learn from CP3. Um, and obviously, we've talked about that and harped on that over the past couple episodes as well. But the main thing that I noticed from him is he mentioned that he's already been working with all of the bigs, Victor, Zach, and Charles, on pick and rolls and pick and pops. So just that two-man game that we really saw blossom last season,
Mhm.
even before the year, those guys have been really trying to build that chemistry out. Not just Victor, but with Zach and Charles as well. So to hear that, when we saw how, that was really one of our main sources of offense last year, to see that that's continuing and it's, still trying to be improved even more, was good to see for sure.
Yeah, and not to repeat everything that you just said, but I'm just gonna say ditto. Um, and then the only addition to that is I'm really excited about his confidence level as well. I know I said that about Malachi, but he's also carrying himself a lot
Hmm.
differently. He seems to have taken on that leadership mantle alongside Keldon and the vets. And the goal seems to be very clear as across the board, but Devin definitely said it on competing and learning and kind of really shooting for that playoff spot. And kind of what you said with the working with the bigs, it seems like he's been in San Antonio a lot in general, putting in a lot of work and organizing a lot of team effort, and team chemistry, especially like in that text group chat that they all
Yeah,
keep
yeah, yeah,
alluding
yeah.
to. So that's wonderful to see from him as well.
For sure. Just to get to some of the comments here, we'll kind of talk about Media Day overall, because that's what everybody's kind of talking about here in the comments. So Wemby's Castle says, I know Media Day is every year, and it's people saying things that people want to hear. Last
Mhm.
year, prime example, right?
Right.
But honestly, this Media Day felt different. It hit difference. Hell, Harrison Barnes even shouted out Blake Wesley without being questioned. That's a really good point that you bring up. You kind of stole one of my points that I'm going to get to later when I talked about Harrison Barnes. But it definitely, I'll go to Keldon next, because that kind of ties into what Wemby's Castle is talking about. Last year when Keldon got up there, I think the first thing he said was, I want to show y'all that I'm a good defender. Like,
Mhm.
and you could tell it wasn't like bad vibes from Keldon, but you could tell he'd been hearing and seeing everything. And
Mhm.
he kind of wanted to go up there and make a statement. This time was completely different. Like, it was, I don't want to say like it was like the old Keldon, but that infectious energy, that we see from Keldon in the pregame huddles. I mean, going back to 2021 when he dunked on Grant Williams, I was at that game against the Celtics, and the crowd's going crazy, even though, the team was very much in the middle of the road, at the end of the DeJounte Derrick era. He's always kind of brought that juice and that positive energy. And I really felt that in his press conference. One of the other quotes that I had from him is he said he wants to star in his role, whatever that may be. He also said that he just he kind of opened up like feeling grateful. He said, like, I feel blessed and like honored just to be a part of this organization for as long as I have. And Keldon gets so much crap. So when he's up there and he's just like, man, I'm just so happy to be a Spur, is
Mhm.
basically what he's saying. Like, that's something that I think, like, I'm not trying to sit here and say he's perfect, but like, that's something that I think a lot of Spurs fans forget sometimes. There's not a lot of guys around the league that like really want to be here. I mean, obviously that's going to happen a lot more with Victor on the roster, but Keldon was here before all that,
Yep.
and he's someone who's wanted to be here then and stick around later. So I'd love to hear that from him. But again, he said he wants to star in his role, whatever that may be. I think that's the perfect mentality for Keldon at this point in his career. He said defense was his main focus this summer. And he said specifically being locked in, that ties into communication, not taking plays off, some other themes that we've been talking about, kind of leading up to this year. And again, probably if we did have to pick one big thing for Keldon to improve on, it was his defense. I'm pretty sure we heard that last year as well, but still good to hear that that was still the main focus. And then the last quote that I had from Keldon, and it's about Victor, but still, I wrote it down. Victor is one of the hardest workers I've ever seen in my life when it comes to basketball on and off the court.
Mm. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you touched on was he's found that inner peace, zen-like moment around him the entire media day, And then the only other thing I'll say is he's those 2 arm sleeves with the number 0 looking like prime Russ in OKC. I'm a big fan. I like the vibe that that's bringing to the team.
Yes, yes. The different demeanor,
Yeah,
it kind of seemed refreshed. He's
yes,
got the new haircut, he's got
looks
the new
fresh.
number, he's got the new arm sleeves. I think, the appearance tied into kind of what you felt off of his vibe as well.
Right. The lost weight has something to do with that too.
Oh, there you go.
A
There you
lean
go.
look.
Yes, yes, that's a good point. And he even mentioned, he said he couldn't give out the exact number, but he
Mhm.
says his nutrition was, a big part of,
Right.
improving that and getting that number where he wanted it to be. But any other final thoughts on Keldon?
No, sir.
All righty. Well, let's go on. Who do you want to go to next? We got Pop, we got Wemby, we got CP3, Harrison, Jeremy. You got any preference?
I'll go where you wanna go, my friend.
Okay,
We're in this together.
we'll go with Jeremy, and then we'll kind of get to see all the the new guys, and then Pop and Wemby at the end.
Okay.
And here we go. Cowboy Tanaka says
Yeah.
Sohan's colors are back too, and he mentioned that kind of ties into the vibe thing, and also just like his personality as well. It wasn't the exact same thing as Keldon, but it was kind of similar. He touched on a lot of things, about the mental side of things. That's one of the things I have written down here. It talked a lot about being in the right mental place and leaning on his support system, to stay positive throughout those rough moments.
Mhm.
He also said that he feels like he's going to be able to go through this training camp much more freely and not thinking as much because he's not, the point guard experiment isn't going on anymore. And so that's another thing that's great to see. Obviously, it makes sense with what we saw last year and even some of the comments that he made, in some of the press conferences at the beginning of last season, where he's like, sometimes I'm just like, screw this stuff, and it can be frustrating. I think this will definitely be more like where Jeremy can just be Jeremy,
Mhm.
when he gets on the floor, which I think is going to do a lot of things for everybody. Harrison Barnes even touched on that in his press conference too. But he said he also learned a lot from the Olympic pre-qualifiers, even though Poland, wasn't able to advance. He said it almost felt like a playoff atmosphere. So he kind of wanted to bring that intensity. That's another theme that we'll see with Wemby actually being in the Olympics and kind of saying the same thing. And then he also mentioned that he did work a lot on his shooting form over the summer, specifically talked about where his elbow placement is,
Mhm.
and just making the shot look cleaner. And then also the last thing I had written down, which we opened up with, is he's back to the hair switches as well. So,
Mm.
man, I mean, talking about being in the right place mentally, getting better at shooting, and also, learning from the experiences he had this summer. I mean, I think that's what you'd want to hear from Jeremy.
Yes, he's back to being the Jeremy Sohan that we all know and love at that wing power forward position. And I love what you said about getting back to his old state of mind and his comfort zone in terms of how he plays the game. And he alluded to Chris Paul and how he likes to play off of guards, and be that primary defender. And we've all seen the stats of him being one of the most efficient cutters to the
Yeah.
rim, on top of him working on his jump shot. I know it's all kind of conversation, like someone alluded to in the comments. It's all what we want to hear, I guess,
Right.
going into a training camp. Um, but in terms of Keldon, Jeremy, honestly, I would throw Malachi in there. There's definitely a body language and a tonal shift in their voice
Yeah.
and in their vibe that I think that speaks more than what they're actually saying.
I completely agree. I couldn't have said it better myself. I do want to bring up SSPNOG Robert Ball's comment,
My guy
though.
Ball.
He says, don't want to be a downer, but everybody seems to be drinking the media day Kool-Aid. I think this is an important point, because last year, I remember watching these, and then like that was almost what sparked me predicting the play-in. You
Right.
know what I mean? And
Oh yeah.
we saw how things went. But I think there can be some nuance here. Like you don't want to overreact to some of this stuff, but it really does. Like you mentioned, the body language, the vibe. It really does seem like the ante is up and the intensity is up. And I think a lot of that again stems back to Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes being there. That's another thing that a lot of the guys talked about. And Devin really harped on that as well. That
Mhm.
just having those leaders in the locker room, those veteran presences who have been through some of these moments before, that's something they just didn't have beforehand. And Pop even mentioned that in his press conference. He was like, look, when Tony, Timmy, Manu came in, like they all had guys that they could look to. Timmy had David. Tony had, I don't know who the point guard was then. I was going to say Avery Johnson.
Speedy Claxton.
But regardless, like those were winning teams. You know what I mean? Those were
Mhm.
teams that had already won championships before they got there. This is a completely different scenario with these guys. But I like what John G says. He says, "I'm gonna drink it." So shout out to, hey, we're all Spurs fans at the end of the day. So kind of a
Yeah.
little bit when you watch this, you do. Every team is.
Listen, Robert, the last 4 years, the only time we're happy is at media day. Let us have this. Let us have these 3 weeks where we're all extremely excited about possibly making the play-in team, play-in tournament. But yeah, I totally agree with everything that you just said.
Oh my goodness. That was a great way to put it. But let's move on to some of the other guys. I'll move on to Harrison. He's just next on my list
Love him.
here. So here's what he said. And here's what I'll say. Actually, before I start on this was the last thing I wrote down. I said, I can see why Pop likes him so
Yep.
much. And we'll get into that when we get into Pop's press conference. But his demeanor, just the way that he carries himself, not to harp on all of this, but like Harrison Barnes has been doing this at all the places that he's been, not just San Antonio. So it's a different thing than like the vibe we're talking about with the younger guys and their intensity up. But just the way he carries himself and just even speaks, it's like, okay, this is very professional, put together, takes pride in who he is as a person. And I was just like, okay, this is definitely something Pop would love.
Mm-hmm.
But he harped on Jeremy's uniqueness and versatility as a player. I touched on that earlier. Robert says, chug, chug, chug. I love it. As Ethan is drinking some water too. But this was probably, there's a couple things I wrote down, but the other two are about different players. This was kind of his biggest quote on the season for me. He said, sustaining is a key for us this season. And not to go all over the place, but Chris Paul talked about that when he watched the tape of this team. He's like, they'd get leads and then they'd let it go in the end. Like Harrison Barnes says, you go on those runs. How can we sustain that? You know what I mean? And he went into a lot of different areas about how sustaining things, it's not just going to be on the floor. It's not just going to be offense. It's not just going to be defense. It's going to be habits off the floor throughout a season. It's literally like if you wanted to go into every nook and cranny of an NBA season, like I said, whether that's on the floor or off, he basically kind of touched on it. And I can see how it ties into everything because so much, we had these bursts, throughout last season, or we'd have these close games where at the end we just blow it at the end. And it was almost like we knew it was going to happen. We'd have these great starts and then the third quarter would happen.
Yep.
So I totally got what he was saying there. And I thought that was right on the money. The last two quotes I'll have, and then I'll dish it to you. He said, if I had to pick one guy to shout out, it would be Blake. He's picking up guys full court, getting active, getting steals. He's had a great 2 weeks. And then the last thing that I had written down, this was on Victor. He said he already looks better physically and on the court. So, Harrison's just been watching him from afar, and he's noticing that, just in the little pickup games that they've been running so far. And then also that quote on Blake, stood out to me a lot. And I see why. I forget who it was, but I see why they mentioned it in the comments.
Yeah, a lot of people have talked about Victor's strength addition. I think Jeremy even specifically said, like, you can tell. Whereas before he was having to take fadeaway jumpers because you would push him off of his block. Now he's just able to turn around and shoot it straight up.
Right.
Like small things like that have improved with him. It's not just, for show. The Blake Wesley thing, obviously everyone that watches our show knows that I'm the biggest Blake Wesley supporter. So I'm very excited that Harrison called that out. I'm glad that he's continuing to do that despite having a CP3 and a Harrison Barnes on the court with him, and he's not being intimidated. He's like taking up that challenge. And we saw the clips of him talking to Chris Paul. I'm curious if Chris Paul's the guy that he has been hounding and how that has panned out. Because obviously we don't have like the score or full game footage of their practices and their training camps.
Right.
So we don't know how it's panning out. For all we know, he could be getting his butt kicked by the Hall of Fame point guard, Chris Paul. But regardless of that, really great for Harrison Barnes to bring that up. And it speaks volumes because he is the most well-spoken athlete I think I have ever heard. I think Victor might be one if English were his first language, but that is literally Victor's only inhibitor. But Harrison is just so well-spoken, Doesn't matter what the question is. It feels like he has a soliloquy to just rattle off without hesitation or pause, which is insane. So he's definitely a leader that I'm excited to have on this team. And there was something else I wanted to say, but for the life of me, I'm forgetting what it
Talking
was.
about sustaining, I talked a lot about that.
Yes, the sustaining thing, and then the only thing I was going to touch on was the good habits, because the
Oh
question I
yeah.
believe was, your young players on the team are saying that their goal is, playoffs. Like, how do you balance that as a veteran on this team? And he just immediately was like, it starts with good habits. It
Hmm.
starts like right now, and I think that speaks volumes. Again, not to continue to overuse a phrase, but
Right.
his words matter. He is a champion. And I had a friend of mine tell me, yeah, he's a champion on a team that had Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, whatever that is. He took that championship mentality and was a piece of getting
Hmm.
Sacramento back to the playoffs. When he got there, they had that huge playoff drought. He got them there. Of course, they never got past the first round with him there. But that team completely turned around their mentality, and now they're a playoff contender every year. So I think he definitely had a component to play in that situation.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly
Thank you,
there,
sir.
my guy. Now, because we're talking about Harrison, I know we still got Wemby and CP3, but I'm going to jump to Pop because he had a quote about Harrison that stood
Yeah.
out to me. So he coached the FIBA World Cup team
Mhm.
in 2019 that competed in China, and Harrison Barnes was on that team.
Yep.
And Pop said, that's basically when I fell in love with them. I've been actually trying to figure out a way to get him here ever since. And it wasn't like one of those, you read this and it's out
Like,
of
BS.
context.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then he's trolling or whatever. Like if you listen to it, he was genuinely serious when he said it. And he says he's a guy that just, goes to the next play, does his job, doesn't, he's very in the moment whenever he's playing. He doesn't, let past things affect him. He's just, and he said also, he compared him to Avery Johnson. And he said that he's someone that like, he gets the most out of himself is the way that he described it. Like everything that you could get out of his potential, like he's trying to do it. And
Mhm.
that was the thing that really stood out to him. And to go back to Harrison just a second, he thought it was funny that Pop mentioned that. He's like, because Pop ripped me in our first film session, and that just kind of ties into to Pop's coaching style. But it was just funny that Harrison was like, I didn't see it that way. I thought I was getting chewed out when really Pop, just saw how much of a professional he
Mhm.
was and said, man, I'd love to have him in San Antonio. So I think it's perfect timing that it worked out the way that it did. And Cowboy Tanaka comments on that here. He says, Barnes plays with intention every second. We need that mindset. And I couldn't have said it better myself. I didn't have too much written down for Pop. I had the Harrison one, and then I had he believes CD. So he actually answered a question about CD Sissoko and talked about him in length, which was not something, that was on my bingo card for that press conference, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
And he said he believes CD has all the physical tools to be an important player in our program. He just needs to put it all together. Essentially, he still believes in his potential, is kind of what he was letting off. But he
Mm.
complimented him more than I expected him to, is I guess the way that I'll put it. Now, that's not me sitting here like saying that that's Pop announcing that CD Sissoko is going to get rotation minutes this year. I'm just saying when Pop's up there like saying like, I really think this guy can be a part of this team and have a role here, and has a lot of potential that he hasn't fulfilled yet. That made me feel better about CD than I did before I listened to that press conference.
It's a great way to put it. The only thing that I took away from Pop outside of what you just said, and I know we all kind of expected this, so it's not like I'm breaking news here, and it wasn't unexpected necessarily. Um, but when he said like the only person that's guaranteed a starting spot is Victor, everyone else will compete, and they will decide who starts. I don't know if that's an exact quote, but I just
Yeah,
like to hear that from my head coach, and because it puts everybody on edge, and now we're going to have a really competitive training camp.
yeah. I loved when he said that, when he was like, they're going to show me who starts.
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of why in the past couple episodes, we've been like, we got to wait. There's been a caveat to almost everything we said. Like, all of this is going to be determined in training camp, and who knows? But I think, he was like, I think Victor's going to start.
Yeah, pretty
he
much.
was he was like, I'm pretty smart for that. That was a
Mhm.
funny comment. But it's so true though. Like, okay, CP3. is probably that's a shoe in as well.
Yeah.
But everything else, really could kind of be a little bit up in the air. We have our thoughts that I think we feel pretty confident about, but I really think it is, and it may not be different than any other years past in the Spurs organization. But with the additions of Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes that we've been talking about, as well as Wemby going into year 2, the ante is upped. That's
Right.
the main takeaway from media day.
Agreed.
But we will go through 2 more guys because we know you want to hear about them. Chris Paul, he said, this is an interesting note. Trey Jones went to the Chris Paul camp growing up. So he was like, I already knew Trey. I actually knew Trey when he was in high school and college. So that was a funny little connection there. I think he even mentioned that Harrison went way back in the day with Harrison. But him and Harrison have known each other in, I think, other facets that they alluded to. But the Trey Jones one, I did not know that at least they have some sort of relationship. And man, I mean, think about going to his camp as a kid to now you're like really in training camp with Chris Paul. And I'm excited to see, what he teaches Trey Jones. Because I mean, Trey Jones is a true point guard. We've always kind of described him as that. So I think having Chris Paul there on the roster, like, I'm not saying it's going to be a giant jump from Trey, but I think that he's definitely going to be able to teach him a lot.
I think he'll just absorb things naturally playing against him every day in practice and in training camp. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
how active the teaching will be necessarily because Chris Paul will have a lot of things on his mind as well. But just being next to someone that talented that's been doing it for so long, things are naturally just going to, be picked up by Trey for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other quote that I had from Chris Paul, he was only up there for 8 minutes, but this is one that stood out to me. This team has already shown they can play really hard and compete, but now we've got to figure out how to translate that to wins. I'm happy to help with that.
Damn right. Damn right, CP3. Dude, seeing him in a Spurs uniform is just like a dream come true. Like, I really never thought it would happen, and I'm very excited about it. And the only additional thing I would say that I enjoyed hearing him say was like just the youthful energy from this team. And how much that the chemistry is kind of immediately been impacted. I don't think it was him that said it, but somebody said that even CP was actively trying to ingratiate himself with the guys and kind of not let like force himself like I'm who I am, y'all learn around me or whatever, but like let me become one of you guys and kind of find my place in your team. So that's big.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something else that I was going to say about CP3, but it's escaping me. So we'll just go ahead and move on to Wemby. So, man, it's so funny because we were talking about, the LaMarcus thing where LaMarcus said that, Wemby just needs to get some moves down that he can go to over and over. And lo and behold, it comes out. He literally used that word simple. He described it as like knowing what to do in simple situations.
Fundamentals.
Yes. And so he said his biggest emphasis this offseason was fundamentals. He said he learned a lot in the Olympics. And tying into the fundamentals aspect, he said one of the other big focuses is finishing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just, whether that's a fadeaway jumper, or going towards the rim and dunking on somebody, that just kind of ties into the fundamentals point for me.
Yeah, for me, that tells me that he's going to be shooting bank shots, hook shots, simple post moves, nothing crazy. Very reminiscent of LaMarcus and Tim Duncan, who obviously had really efficient careers in San Antonio. Timmy more so than LaMarcus, but I don't think I'm on a ledge when I say that. Yeah, very excited from what I see from Victor. Clearly, he's put on some strength. He's put on some weight. Guys have all said that it's very recognizable in practice. So if he's able to stay on his ground and make some of these simple shots, his efficiency is going to go up. His scoring is going to go up. They're going to have to send double teams. We're going to kick it out. You got CP3 controlling the tempo. Like, things are looking up for Victor Wembanyama.
Couldn't have said it better myself. There are some other things that I have written down for Wemby. He also said he learned a lot from Jamal whenever him and Jamal Crawford were able to train. And he said that was it was very different than learning from a coach because he came from the player's perspective. Right. He also said that he felt like Jamal just had like a way that he saw the game that, he hadn't seen yet. So I mean, I think he learned a lot from that experience is the bottom line. On top of the fact that I think we're going to be able to see some pretty impressive, to say the least, ball handling moves. I'm interested to see the crossovers and the dribble moves that Wemby learned from Jamal Crawford. Because if he can do
Right.
anything like Jamal Crawford, I mean, that's just going to be insane.
I'm assuming Jamal will be involved more in his career. Like, I don't think
Yeah,
Jamal's done,
yeah,
especially now that Chris Paul's in San Antonio. They're friends. They play together with the Clippers. I'm sure he'll make a few more appearances before the season's over.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, when you got somebody with that much potential who's willing to learn,
Mm-hmm. Would be crazy.
for sure, for sure. The last two quotes I have from Victor: this year, we expect for us to win, where last year it was more just kind of getting everybody to know each other and learning each other. And then the last thing I had written down for him is he said it feels like his off-season workout regimen allowed him to progress and quote unquote take the next step. He
Right.
said he felt that in the Olympics, but he said he's sure that's going to help him this season too. And he said after the Olympics, he came back and trained for another 2 weeks in San Antonio, before the guys have kind of started gearing up and working together.
Dude, I'm just licking my lips. I have
I
nothing
know.
to add. Thank you for saying all that. That was very helpful. Beneficial for the people that are listening. I'm just rubbing my hands together.
That's the mood for everybody right now.
Mhm.
Mando says Wemby said in a French interview that he and the Spurs were working on a go-to move for him. They're just being careful on which one to select because his bag is deep. Yeah, there's so much that he can do, but that kind of ties in like simple situations. I want to have something that's go-to.
Right.
But it's like with all the ability he has, it's almost like there was a little bit of hesitation because there's so much he can do.
Right. Which one do I pick?
Right.
For
Exactly.
LaMarcus, it was left shoulder jump hook, left shoulder fadeaway. That was it.
Absolutely. June P. Telford says people forget what CP did for Devin Booker as a winner, not just as a talent. And that ties into the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander point as well.
Yep. Well said.
Chris Rodriguez says, good evening, gentlemen. Chris, we appreciate you being in here. Wemby's Castle brings up another funny point here. Did y'all hear when the reporter asked CP3 what he could teach Wemby? And
I
he
remember
said,
that.
I can definitely teach him how to dunk. That was good.
It's important fundamental.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Mando says, I love that Wemby called out the media and says that he does not have any responsibility to them when it comes to their expectations. Yeah.
Right on.
That was that. I like to see that too. And he didn't do that in like a disrespectful way. He was just like, look, like, I know y'all are going to talk about this. I know I'm going to be in these conversations as, one of the best players in the league, MVP, all this stuff. He's like, but my obligation is to the people in that locker room and the training staff here. And that's just, kind of how I try to block out the noise. So, but it was cool to see him do that for sure. Be like, I have no obligation to any of you guys, but it wasn't like a disrespectful thing. It was just, that's just what it is.
Mm-hmm.
If I buy into all that and drink all the Kool-Aid, then, that's only going to have negative effects for me is kind of what I got. So
I think if he could go back, he would reword it and say the guys in the locker room, the training camp, or the training staff, and then SSPN as well. That's just I could be biased in that.
maybe just a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so to end out the episode, I did want to go over the Spurs preseason schedule so we can just look through it. Our first post game, as well as our first Spurs game of the season, will be next Monday against the Oklahoma City Thunder at 7:00. So that'll probably be around 9:30 when we get on the post game. But yeah, I could share the screen right now, but it's only 5 games anyway, so I'll just read them off. We play Oklahoma City, Orlando, Utah, Miami, and then we end the postseason at Houston.
You mean the postseason? You mean the preseason?
My bad, preseason. Yeah.
I'm gonna say we're moving quick. Very
any
exciting.
any thoughts on the preseason? I know it's you don't want to. We learned last year you can't take too much from those games, honestly,
Mhm.
in general. But what are you looking forward to in these 5 games? What are like, okay, when you turn on the games and you watch them, what are some things that you're going to look to immediately on the floor?
First thing I'll look for is just CP3 and Victor Wembanyama's connection and pick and roll play. See what that looks like. See if it's comfortable. CP3's leadership as well as Harrison Barnes' leadership as well on and off the court. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're doing on the sideline when they are actually done playing. And then the rest of it, I'm sure, will be kind of, you know, garbage minutes for some of the younger players. So Stephon Castle, Harrison Ingram, Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham. What are they able to do? What are they able to show? And try and prove that they're deserving of rotational minutes. Obviously, we think that Stephon's going to get those, but the other guys, it's up for grabs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think honestly, if we just want to look at this from a perspective of like, let's not get too over the top here, probably should just pay attention to all the guys that aren't really going to be in the rotation. Obviously everything you said, like I want to see too. I'm going to be excited to see CP3 out there. I'm going to be excited to see what the sets look like and all that stuff. But I think Mamu's going to get a lot of minutes this preseason. I'm interested to see how he looks. CD Sissoko, Harrison Ingram, and Stephon. Man, Stephon a lot, obviously. And I wish I had more to say, but just after last year, it's hard for me to put too much emphasis into the preseason games. It's just a completely different mentality for both teams that are playing each other. So yeah, in that third and fourth quarter, I'm interested to see if we can see any progression from some of those guys, or like Stephon, because he's a rookie, he might get extended minutes. So maybe even we'll get some Stephon point guard minutes in preseason, late in games where it's like him, David Duke, CD, Mamu, and Julian or something.
Harrison Ingram.
Right.
Put his 6'6" butt in the 5 spot. Put him to the Keldon treatment.
Oh my goodness. Well, Ethan, any final thoughts on preseason, media day, and all this stuff?
It's an extremely exciting time to be a Spurs fan. I think that this media day, unlike the ones in the past couple of years, actually has a little bit more gravitas to it. So drinking the Kool-Aid isn't necessarily as bad as it was in previous years.
For sure, my guy. Well, we appreciate all of you guys being in here tonight.
Yes, sir.
And the next time that we see you guys will be after some actual Spurs basketball. So this will be our final sign off before we are in the season. I'm so ready. And I'm glad we had this media day to kind of actually have some stuff to talk about today.
Likewise.
Alrighty. Once again, we appreciate y'all. If you guys enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button below. If you want to stay updated with the show, follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. Again, we appreciate